Good morning, everyone. So as I was preparing for the scripture lesson, I decided to find out just how old Abraham and Sarah were. And so I backed up to Genesis 17. And Abraham was 99, just about to be 100. And Sarah was 90, just to put that in perspective. This is from Genesis, from the Message, chapter 18, verses 1 through 15. God appeared to Abraham at the oaks of Mamre while he was sitting at the entrance of his tent. It was the hottest part of the day. He looked up and saw 3 men standing. He ran from his tent to greet them and bowed before them. He said, "Master, if it please you, stop for a while with your servant. I'll get some water so you can wash your feet. Rest under this tree. I'll get some food to refresh you on your way, since your travels have brought you across my path." They said, "Certainly, go ahead." Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah. He said, "Hurry, get 3 cups of our best flour, knead it, and make bread." Then Abraham ran to the cattle pen and picked out a nice plump calf and gave it to the servant, who lost no time getting it ready. Then he got curds and milk, brought them with the calf that had been roasted, set the meal before the men, and stood there under the tree while they ate. The men said to him, "Where is Sarah, your wife?" He said, "In the tent." One of them said, "I'm coming back about this time next year. When I arrive, your wife Sarah will have a son." Sarah was listening at the tent opening just behind the man. Abraham and Sarah were old by this time, very old. Sarah was far past the age for having babies. Sarah laughed within herself. An old woman like me get pregnant with this old man of a husband? God said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh, saying, 'Me have a baby, an old woman like me? Is anything too hard for God?' I'll be back about this time next year, and Sarah will have a baby." Sarah lied. She said, "I didn't laugh," because she was afraid. But he said, "Yes, you did. You laughed."
Who would have thought that a story about a 90-year-old and a 100-year-old would make good sermon fodder on a Sunday when we celebrate graduates? Not me, I can tell you. Still, since this is one of the 4 readings that is assigned for this second Sunday after Pentecost, I decided to look a little more closely at it. And well, as Gomer Pyle once said, "Surprise, surprise, surprise." Actually, that's the aspect of the story that I think makes this meaningful for us and especially for our graduates. Gomer might have said surprise 3 times. I actually find at least 4 surprises in this passage, and each one of them has something to teach us. Each one of them offers an encouraging word. The first surprise comes when Abraham looks up and suddenly sees 3 people standing there. Out in the wilderness, it was probably unlikely for a group of 3 to be able to sneak up on somebody unless perhaps they were meaning to do harm. I would think it would have been especially hard to sneak up on somebody who's just sitting in the shade of their tent in the heat of the day. These 3 show up. They must have been a surprise to Abraham, suddenly see them there. His reaction is surprising as well. He does not respond to their sudden presence with fear. His reaction is to treat them with hospitality. He invites them to rest, to soothe their feet with some water, and to take a morsel to eat. So here's the lesson I get from this first surprise. We are called to hospitality, as we journey through life. We are called to be hospitable to family, to friends, and to strangers. The second surprise is that Abraham's servants must have had a microwave oven. Abraham might have said to his surprised guests that they should just stick around for a little morsel to eat, but he gave them a feast. And unless the servants had a microwave oven, I don't see how they could have butchered a calf and roasted it as quickly as they appear to have done so in the story. Of course, I don't really think they had a microwave oven, so perhaps there is a different lesson for us in this surprise of how quickly the feast is prepared. And here's the lesson that I glean. Sometimes what appears to be impossible actually is possible. Or as Nelson Mandela put it, it always seems impossible until it's done. We encounter mountains that seem impossible to climb as we journey through our lives. All of us do. So remember that what seems impossible is often possible and can be done. The third surprise is perhaps the most obvious surprise in the reading, and that's the surprise pregnancy that the strangers announce. Now, I want to be clear to our high school graduates and to their parents that I'm not suggesting that anybody rush off and go get pregnant. I am suggesting, however, that there is some lesson in here. And for me, it's a lesson about creativity. There is, I think, no greater act of human creativity than the act of creating life. The story of Sarah getting pregnant and of Sarah and Abraham becoming parents is a story that reminds us that as stewards of God's creation, we are called to be partners with God in the act of creativity. Whenever we are bringing forth something new into the universe, be that art or research or building something or designing something or any act of creativity, we are acting in the image and likeness of God. This is true for all of us, and especially true for our graduates to remember as they step deeper into their full selves and further along the pathway towards independence. The fourth surprise is a surprise that Abraham and Sarah do not appear to recognize. If you look closely, the fourth surprise is that one of these strangers is actually God, and Abraham and Sarah don't realize it. I'm glad that they don't recognize God, at least not at this point in the story. I'm glad that they are surprised by the announcement, but don't see past the announcer. This surprise reminds me both that God is always around and that I am not always going to recognize the presence of God. It is a reassurance to me that I'm reminded that God is always present. And it is reassuring to me to know that the great matriarch and patriarch of our faith sometimes missed that reality. I'm going to too. We do not need to be perfect. We do not need to be perfect in our work. We do not need to be perfect in our faith. Instead of being called to be perfect, we are called to be faithful. And that is something we can all do.